I know what you're thinking. Rob, why did you do it to yourself again? Another black box with the ZT logo. Yeah, and it's not a guest blade, and it's not a sharpening job. I did it again. I bought another ZT. You guys know it's been a stormy love-hate relationship between me and the upper echelon of Kai USA. But I got another one. Stick with me and we'll talk about it. Hi gang, Rob here. It's the morning of 11 June 2014. Yep, I got another one. And here it is. Oh. Here it is. Yeah, you recognize that? Well, it's a ZT0550 or a ZT550 as most of us have come to know it. Those of you who have been following my channel for some time will remember I did, I guess maybe 2, maybe 3 videos on my original ZT550. It was a knife that I really, really liked in a lot of ways, and then there were some annoyances that ultimately made me sell the knife. I'm kind of one of those guys, you know, if I've got a little thing or two that just sort of bother me about a blade, sometimes it'll, even if they're not really important, they'll bother me enough to make me not carry the knife, and therefore it'll go up for sale. Such was the case with my 550. And those of you who are knife nuts kind of know how this goes. You sell a knife because you think there are things out there you want more. And from the day you put it in the mail, you kind of wish you had it back. Yeah, that was me with the 550. So, a couple weeks ago, I was just, you know, hawking the Cove on USN. And a gentleman had for sale on the Cove a very gently used 550 with a custom carbon fiber presentation side scale. That's presentation side for you right-handers anyway. And isn't it cool? Would you call that a basket weave carbon fiber? And does it have a hint of copper in it? I think it does, especially if you contrast it with, can you see that? If I sit it next to the black scale, that copper really shows up, which I think is kind of cool, especially when you flip the knife over and you see that gorgeous copper peat gray lock stabilizer. Isn't that cool? Look. Nicely done. Now, why did I buy this knife? Well, because of a couple of those issues I didn't really love about the 550. One of which is this horrendous thing. I don't know what they were thinking when they designed this scale. This G10 scale. It might be the ugliest aesthetic component I've ever seen on a knife. It's just horrible. It also makes it virtually impossible to mount the clip on the left side, and we'll kind of talk about that as we go. Yeah, it's drilled for it. The liners are tapped. The liner is tapped for it, but it just doesn't work. It doesn't mount flat back here where it needs to, and it's real goofy grabby where the clip grabs your pants. If you remember, on my 550, I ground it and then sanded it smooth so it was like a polished G10. Much like this surface, actually. So let me talk about, before I tell you why I love this knife enough to buy another one, let me remind you real quickly what I didn't like about it. First of all, it's just heavy. It's a 3.5 inch-ish blade. It is a very robust blade. Gosh, must be 4 millimeters thick. Looks like, yeah, that's approaching 3/16 of an inch in thickness. Kind of stubby, not much cutting edge for the size of the handle. Ground pretty thickly behind the edge. You guys know I sort of gravitate towards slicer over pry bar, and I just didn't feel like it was a good enough slicer to suit me for everyday carry, especially considering its weight. Is it well balanced? No. It's pretty butt heavy. The balance point of the knife is right on that point, which is odd. Makes it a little, it's not bad in hand. It's but none of those issues are really why I didn't like it. Here's why I didn't like it. Look at that thick titanium slab the pocket clip is screwed into. And then if I flip it over for left-hand carry, look how thin the liner is. And on my original version, the pocket clip screws, when flipped over to use for left-hand carry, were too short to get to the threads in the liner. So I had to borrow some screws off my Benchmade 710 to make that work. That always bothered me. And then clip location. If you flip it over for lefty carry, I'm going to try to get this in view for you. I should have brought a light down with me, but I didn't. This knife has gone through several iterations. The first 550s had the normal butter knife Kershaw clip with 2 screws here and here instead of here and here. When they switched to this deep carry clip, they left on the sort of Gen 1.5 versions, they left the other 2 holes and just drilled 2 new ones. The problem was, in Gen 1.5, there was a big lightning slot in that liner right here that precluded locating this bottom screw because there was no liner there to locate it in. So they moved the clip mount up, which meant when you moved the clip over for lefty carry, it stuck clear out to here, which was very odd. Now, here's an interesting thing. Even they continue to infuriate me. You can see in there, guys, that lightening hole, that big old cutout that used to be right here in the liner is gone. You would think they did that so they could relocate the screws in the proper location, but they didn't. This knife, without the lightning hole, the lightning hole that was presumably removed to relocate the screws, still has the screws in the wrong spot. When I bought this knife, I actually thought, you know what? If they've moved the screws, I'm going to go ahead and drill and tap this carbon fiber scale for lefty carry. But they're in the wrong place still. So I'm carrying this knife in my left pocket backwards and then flipping it over every time I open it. And I'm probably going to leave it that way. And you know what? It's just going to have to be okay. It's just going to have to be okay. Because there's so much to love about this knife. Let me get started on the love here. And this isn't going to be a real long video. I just kind of want to explain why I did this and why I'm glad I did. There have been several models that ZT and Kershaw have produced in the last 2 years that are Hinderer design. Now, I don't know how involved Rick Hinderer has been in the design of these Kershaws and ZTs. Because frankly, with the possible exception of this one knife, what they seem like to me are completely Kershaw construction, some rather perverted Hinderer design cues. And when I say perverted, I mean they took aspects or visual elements of some of Rick Hinderer's XM18 design, slapped them on a knife, executed them poorly to make it sort of resemble a Hinderer, and then and they photograph so well. They look so good in the pictures on the website listings. And you get them in hand and you're like, what are they thinking? Why would they put that there? And my poster child for that is the 560 and 561 with the flipper and the bearings. And I'm just going to talk about that knife for a minute. It has a flipper and it has coarse, sharp jimping on the spine, and when you flip the knife open, it basically files the skin in large chunks off your index finger. When you go to close the knife, I'll use my right hand, doesn't matter. You move the lock bar over, you close the knife, the flipper hits your thumbnail. If you're in the most natural position, it's too far forward, so the knife sort of stays there. If you remove your thumb in the natural position, it hasn't made it over the detent ball yet, and because it's on ridiculously loose ball bearings, it flops back open. If you make sure your thumb's back far enough and you pay attention and you get past the detent ball, as you're sliding your thumb out of the way, the knife closes on it because it's so free. It's ridiculously free. You know, it's like a 3.7-inch blade, and it just flops. It opens when you don't want it to. It closes when you don't want it to. It also has a ridiculously stiff detent. If you're using the knife right-handed, trying to use the flipper, if you have your fingers in this position where they're resting on the lock bar, good luck getting it open. You got to bring them back here so they're not resting on the lock bar, and then you don't have a great grip on the knife, and you're manipulating the flipper and your fingers digging into the jimping, and it's rather an abortion of a knife. That's why I think you see so many of them for sale on the used market. Guys get them in their hand and they're catch and release because they're the emperor with no clothes. Big old knife, the 560, very lightweight on ball bearings, little tiny ball bearings, and not very many of them. It looks like a tough guy knife. It really is a kid's toy. Oh yeah, and it also has Elmax steel. Have fun with that, boys. Then we get to the 550. It is a thumb stud knife. And oh, what a thumb stud knife it is. Watch. Touch it. It's out. Touch it. It's out. And check this out. Whoop, I actually was putting a little weird pressure on it. Blade drops free. I'm not very coordinated with my right hand, and I've got the camera at a very funny angle. With just a very little jiggle, the knife blade closes. Won't close on your fingers when you don't want it to. It's just perfect. I mean, it's perfect. Oh, and by the way, we don't have any bearings. We have these big, beefy, but very smooth phosphor bronze washers. And by the way, is it solid? Yeah, it's like feels like a fixed blade solid, which is facilitated, of course, by the dual stop pins, aka thumb studs. And oh yes, they are thumb studs, aren't they? Oh, they're thumb studs. The mechanism on this knife for a heavy, robust knife that's not a Sebenza. is unbelievable. In my opinion, the mechanism of this knife for a folding knife, heavy-duty tactical knife, absolutely hands down, bar none, the best Kershaw has ever made. Okay, I want to talk Lockup a little bit, sort of about the 550 in general, and then specifically about the two that I've owned. They are, of course, titanium frame locks. They do come carbidized from the factory. I have noticed in the few of these that I've handled that the Lockup, it runs the gamut between perfect and kind of scary. If you notice, the axis of the pivot, if you drew a line through longitudinally, the axis of the pivot is about where my thumbnail is in the lock bar. Meaning, even if engagement is clear out here at the outside of the lock bar, it's still pretty close to the axis of the knife. And I have seen 550s that even though the lock bar is carbidized, it wears rather quickly. And that contact point between blade tang and lock bar starts here and it starts moving this way. The lock bar end actually becomes shaped kind of like this, and you develop lock rock. Blade roll, I guess, would be a better description, because as that contact point moves closer to the axis, there is no force in that counterclockwise direction against the blade tang. It can just sort of slip up and down on the contact point. My original one did develop that just a little bit. This knife, however, has about no wear in the end of the lock bar. It engages at about 35 or 40%. It has no lock slip. If I apply negative pressure, none at all. It has no side-to-side or up and down play. And if we look at the blade tang, look at the wear pattern, there you can see it ends about right there. So this knife is in no danger of developing that blade roll. It is kind of a late serial number. It is number 5243. So they were getting the carbidized lock bar right later in production, and current models come with a ZT0801 style steel insert. So those days should be over. Ergonomically, we don't have jimping where it shouldn't be. There's no reason to have jimping here on the spine of the handle. There's just no reason for it. Ironically, there's no flipper on this knife, which is fine, but the jimping's where it needs to be, right where your thumb is. I've also dinged the 550 or the 560 for this underside of the handle jimping, which is very painful if you're working hard with a 560. For some reason, on the 550, it just doesn't seem to bother you as much. I think because the rest of the handle is so stable in hand. In all grips, this knife is just so comfortable. Because it's not a flipper, you don't have in the draw cut grip a flipper digging into the web of your hand like you do on the 560. This knife, the 550, and doesn't it look gorgeous with that carbon fiber scale and that copper peat gray bead? I'm probably not going to do anything to this knife, except you can probably tell that I sharpened it. S35VN steel, becoming my favorite as an all-purpose, all-around steel. Probably the best compromise, the best balance between edge retention, toughness, and sharpenability, and corrosion protection of any steel I've ever worked with. I just love it. This one is pretty thick. It's that secondary bevel, which appears to be pretty broad, is at 17 degrees. If I backed it off much more than that, would have looked kind of ridiculous. Still a pretty good slicer though, but a robust knife. I did have to enhance the choil. so my edge would be straight to the back. My other beef with this knife is that the sharpening choil from the factory is too small. You get a lot of flare at the back. And every one of these knives I've ever seen, because of that, from the factory comes with a big recurve. And it looks stupid. It's got this big fat heel that hangs down in this recurve section here that's not supposed to be that way by design. It's supposed to be straight like this. So it takes some work in this choil area and at the base of the edge to get them right. But you know what? I can get it right. So it makes it worth having. It is the best. We haven't really seen 562s yet on the market. So let's put an asterisk behind this and say, with the possible exception of the 562 once we start getting it in hand, but the ZT0550, in my humble opinion, is hands down, bar none, the best Kershaw /ZT/Hinderer knife they've ever produced. If you don't have one, go get one. They're available on the secondary market, even kind of pimped up with the carbon fiber scale and a peat gray bead. I paid $140 shipped for this on the Cove, and cosmetically and mechanically the knife was perfect. All it needed was an edge. I love it, and I'm probably going to keep it until I get tired of it, but I probably won't. Have a great day, guys. Grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. And remember, the word is sharp.